Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's definitely on sort of the broader roadmap around things. Right now, we're still defining the specification, and you can see we kind of have that demonstrator to sort of get ourselves a little bit to that step where it's like, oh, how will we actually check that these things? How do we actually write these things in code? And so I could see a logical next step being a way where other people could then also validate the spec. But again, I don't think we've talked in detail enough about it, but that's really interesting. And again, please join the working group and yeah.
Yeah, and we've kind of discussed that with Ensui. And there's a lot of complexity in actually looking at the data itself and saying, okay, is the data, like, for example, if you aggregate from one hierarchy of the grid to another, do these things reconciliate? And that's a very complicated topic, I think. So our approach was to say, okay, well, we want to make a specification that doesn't tell people how to do that, but just provides them the framework for reporting the data once they have done that. Because we don't, like, they have a better knowledge of their own systems than we do. And it will be very complicated to capture all that complexity, I think. Yeah.
I don't think we've discussed that in detail, but that's a very interesting kind of important piece of the spec. And I think in terms of that example, Hibbing, I think we'd have to incorporate into like maybe the metadata or into the data itself, sort of what level of aggregation sort of is being provided. And so I think from a policy perspective or broader things would be how the spec gets imposed or kind of gets used across these utilities. But at least from our perspective, if people know kind of what level of aggregation they're working with, hopefully those are kind of decisions that the users of the API and the users of the data would be able to kind of decide. But that's as far as I've really thought about in terms of how we would sort of impose different levels of aggregation on the spec. Do you have any?
Yeah, I think other people in the room here might be working on these topics. Like the energy tech people, no, they're here. So better talk to them than us.
Yeah. Thank you, though. That's a really important thing to make sure that we think about. Yeah, very good point. And so hopefully the users of sort of these different APIs that are implemented at different levels can kind of make those intelligent decisions of how they want to calculate consumed carbon intensity and who they trust and that sort of stuff. Thank you.
Any last question? Yeah. Yeah.
our optimism on the actual policies that are going to enforce the carbon data.
Ah.
Yeah.
That's political. Yeah, I guess we have to be. I think we can all hope that they do get enforced and that they do accelerate things because, well, we need it. I'm not the policy expert, so I don't know. But
Yeah, I'm gonna. Yeah, optimism is the only kind of answer with that.
yeah.
How do you deal with limitations? So I think of one very specific one in the US with PJM. They consider for their locational marginal emissions data all imported energy is zero carbon, which is kind of ridiculous. But and it's documented, so like they're very clear about that. But how, do you build in tools? Do you build in or account for that in your tools, or just?
Yeah, so I think where we're at right now is sort of the specification is for, to be implemented by individual utilities or system operators, and we haven't yet sort of thought about where something like consumed carbon intensity gets calculated, or if it's even part of this spec, or whether there's another specification that kind of is taking this at an upper level and computing kind of the system level kind of work. And so the short answer is we haven't thought about that yet, and we're not exactly sure how that calculation plays into what would be on like an individual system operator's level. But the hope would be that we'd be able to kind of use this, at least this fuel mix data and the imports and exports that were mentioned, to be able to calculate that more correctly if you were able to have PJM's fuel mix and you were able to use the similar standard for all the grids that are going in and out of PJM. You'd hopefully be able to calculate a more accurate consumed carbon intensity.
Yeah, and let them know that it's a bit shady.
Yeah.
I told them. They're not going to change it for me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so that's a very exciting question because the other working group that just talked before us is focusing, as you've seen, on customer data. And so hopefully we're hoping to kind of collaborate going forward in order to have a shared specification so you could combine things like behind the meter work with the fuel mix information coming from TSOs and stuff.
All right, last question. I think we're over time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. The question was around whether how if somebody came to us with power systems data, how would we be able to validate that the actual data is correct?
Yeah. So I don't think that's the role of the specification to verify the data. The specification provides a guidelines for how to share that data. And then people can trust it or not trust it, depending on where it comes. But the real goal is to make it easy for people to fetch data from multiple places at once. And then the person that will fetch the data will be the best judge of that. Yeah, as the working group, what we're building is a specification. We're not building the unified API that will fetch data for electricity for all across the world. No, we just want to make it easy for people that have projects that do need that data to get it. So we see that specification being shared across many different projects whenever there's that need to parse that data, but we're not going to be the masters of the data ourselves. All right?
Cool, yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks everybody.